Chapter 1: The Gilded Cage. The car's engine whined, a high, strained complaint as Declan navigated the final ascent. For the past hour, the road had narrowed from a respectable two-lane blacktop to a single, rutted track that clawed its way through a dense wood of pine and skeletal birch. Sunlight struggled through the canopy, painting the windscreen with strobing patterns of light and shade. In the back, 8-year-old Finn had finally abandoned his handheld game, pressing his face to the window. Isla, 14 and perpetually unimpressed, had her earbuds in, a silent, rhythmic nodding her only sign of life. Rowena watched her husband. Declan's hands were steady on the wheel, but a frantic energy radiated from him. His knuckles were white. He had staked everything on this. His inheritance, their savings, the last 10 years of his academic reputation. It was all tied up in the property they were about to claim. Blackwood Keep. Even the name sounded like a line from a Gothic novel, a fact Declan found endlessly charming and Rowena found vaguely unsettling. "Almost there," he announced, his voice tight with an excitement that bordered on reverence. "The solicitor said the road gives way to the main drive just past this crest, said we wouldn't see the house until we were right upon it." He was right. As the car leveled out, the oppressive curtain of trees abruptly fell away. A low, crumbling stone wall, bearded with moss, marked the entrance. Two immense, wrought-iron gates stood open, their metalwork twisted into the shapes of thorny roses. Beyond them, a gravel drive cut a clean gray line through a lawn of impossible greenness, and at the end of the drive stood the castle. A gasp came from Isla in the backseat. She had pulled her earbuds out. "Dad, it's real. It's a real castle." It was perfect. Utterly, impossibly perfect. Towers of handsome gray stone rose against the bruised purple of the Scottish sky. Sunlight glinted from dozens of diamond-paned windows. Not a single stone appeared out of place. Not a slate was missing from the steep, conical roofs. Ivy clung to the walls in neat, artistic patterns, its leaves a deep, healthy green. It was a picture from a storybook, a fantasy made solid. Declan let out a long, shaky breath, a sound of pure triumph. "I told you, Ro. I told you it was the find of a lifetime." Rowena said nothing. She saw the perfect castle, the green lawn, the pristine towers. But for a splinter of a second, a phantom image had superimposed itself over the scene. For an instant, she saw a ruin. She saw the towers crumbling, the windows dark and vacant like the eye sockets of a skull. She saw gray, weeping lichen covering the stones and the ivy not as a decoration but as a parasite, its tendrils thick as pythons, crushing the life from the structure. A smell, faint and sour, of wet rot and decay had pricked at her nostrils. Then it was gone. The castle was perfect again. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. "Are you all right?" Declan asked, his hand finding hers. His skin was warm. "You're quiet." "Tired from the drive," she said, forcing a smile. "It's impressive deck, truly." She had to be tired. The stress of the move, the long hours in the car, the sheer weight of her husband's ambition. It was enough to make anyone see things. Declan parked the car on the gravel, the crunching sound loud in the profound silence. As the engine died, the quiet of the place settled over them. It was not a peaceful quiet. It was a weighted silence, the kind that presses on the eardrums. Finn was out of the car first, a blur of motion as he ran onto the vast lawn, his shouts swallowed by the sheer scale of the estate. Isla followed, more slowly, a genuine smile finally breaking through her teenage armor as she spun in a slow circle, taking it all in. The great oak door of the keep, studded with black iron, swung open before they reached it. A man stood framed in the doorway. He was tall and impossibly handsome, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of old gold. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, and he wore a tweed jacket of a quality Rowena had only ever seen in magazines. Threads of actual gold seemed to be woven into the fabric, catching the light as he moved. He smiled, a warm, welcoming expression that did not quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Matheson, I presume," the man said, his voice a low, melodious baritone like whiskey poured over velvet. "Welcome to Blackwood Keep. I am the caretaker." Declan, usually so articulate, seemed momentarily flustered. He shook the man's offered hand. "Declan, yes. And this is my wife, Rowena. My daughter, Isla, and the blur on the lawn is Finn." "A pleasure," the caretaker said, his golden eyes sweeping over them. "We have been anticipating your arrival." As Rowena met his gaze, the world flickered again. The handsome man was gone. In his place stood a thing of horror, a creature assembled from sticks and rags and what looked like peeling birch bark. Patches of dried moss served as its hair, and its face was a grotesque mask of stitched-together scraps of leather and pale, human-looking skin. 2 holes were burned into the mask where its eyes should be, and from their depths, a malevolent yellow light glowed. The smell of rot and grave dirt washed over her, thick and suffocating. She flinched, a strangled gasp catching in her throat. She blinked hard. The handsome man stood before her, his expression one of polite concern. "Madam, are you well?" Declan's hand was on her arm. What is it?" "Nothing," she stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "A dizzy spell, the long drive." She forced herself to meet the caretaker's eyes again. There was nothing there but courteous inquiry, a trick of the light, a migraine aura. It had to be. "Please come inside," the man said, stepping aside. "Allow me to introduce the rest of the household. Mr. Finch will see to your luggage." The interior of the castle was even more stunning than the exterior. A great hall rose 2 stories, crisscrossed with heavy oak beams. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, large enough for a man to stand in. A vast tapestry depicting a vibrant hunting scene hung opposite it. The air was cool and smelled of beeswax and dried roses. Everything was immaculate. The polished flagstones shone. The wood glowed with a deep luster. A second man appeared as if from nowhere. He was tall, rail-thin, and clad in a severe black suit. His posture was unnaturally rigid, and he moved with a silent, gliding motion that was deeply unsettling. "This is Mr. Finch, our butler," the caretaker said. "Welcome," Mr. Finch said. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. He bowed his head, a stiff, bird-like gesture. He did not smile. As Mr. Finch turned to head outside, presumably to retrieve their bags, Rowena saw his shadow stretch across the polished floor. It was wrong. The shadow was distorted, bent, its limbs too long and jointed in too many places like that of a great insect. She stared at it, mesmerized, until Declan nudged her gently, guiding her further into the hall. "It's magnificent," Declan breathed, his voice echoing in the vast space. "It's a museum. It shouldn't exist in this condition." A young woman in a simple gray dress with a white apron came down the grand, sweeping staircase. She had a bright, cheerful face and red, rosy cheeks. She curtsied as she approached. "And this is Myra," the caretaker said. "She will see to the children and the general upkeep of your rooms." "It's a delight to have the sound of children in these halls again," Myra said, her voice a lilting, musical soprano. She beamed at Isla and Finn, who had finally ventured inside. Finn, usually shy, seemed captivated. Rowena looked at the maid, and again the glamour wavered. Beneath the rosy cheeks and bright eyes she saw a different face, a face of gray mud, cracked and wet. Strands of green, slimy weed matted the hair. Water trickled from the corners of the eyes, leaving dark, clean streaks in the filth. A smell of stagnant pond water, of things that rot in the deep and the dark, filled Rowena's senses. The cheerful smile was a wide, lipless gash in the mud. Rowena felt the blood drain from her face. She swayed, grabbing onto Declan's arm to steady herself. "Row, you need to sit down," Declan said, his voice sharp with worry. He guided her to a heavy, carved oak chair near the fireplace. "You look pale as a sheet." "I'm fine," she insisted, though the words were a lie. Her body was trembling. The visions were coming faster now, more intense. The caretaker leaned in, his handsome face a mask of solicitude. "Perhaps some refreshment after your long travel. Cook has prepared a light meal." He gestured them towards a wide archway that led into a dining hall. The room was dominated by a long, dark wood table, already set with gleaming silverware and crystal glasses. A fire crackled in another hearth. The table was laden with food, platters of cold meats, artisanal cheeses, crusty loaves of bread, bowls of gleaming fruit, and a large, frosted cake as the centerpiece. It was a feast. A portly man in a chef's uniform emerged from another door, beaming. "Welcome, welcome. I am Chef Dubois. Please eat." Declan laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "This is incredible. We don't know what to say. We weren't expecting." "The master insists upon a warm welcome for his new tenants," the caretaker said smoothly. He had not given them his name, Rowena realized, nor had he mentioned a master. They sat at the table. Declan and the children ate with gusto, praising the flavor of everything. Rowena picked at a slice of bread. It looked perfect, but to her it tasted faintly of sawdust. She took a bite of cheese. It was rich and creamy on her tongue, but the aftertaste was of mold and damp earth. She looked at the glistening roast beef. She saw a platter of raw, spoiled meat, shimmering with a faint iridescence, a nest of tiny white worms writhing in a fold of the flesh. She put her fork down, a wave of nausea rolling through her. "Not hungry?" Declan asked, his mouth full. "Just tired," she repeated. The excuse was wearing thin. Later they were shown to their rooms. The master suite was enormous, with a four-poster bed so large it was a piece of architecture in itself. The windows overlooked the sprawling grounds. It was beautiful, luxurious. But as Rowena ran her hand over the rich crimson brocade of the wallpaper, her fingertips registered a different texture. For a sickening moment, the paper felt spongy and damp, like diseased flesh. It felt warm. She snatched her hand away as if burned. She stared at the wall. It was just wallpaper. Beautiful, ornate wallpaper. That night, as Declan slept soundly beside her, a deep, restful sleep she knew she would not find, Rowena lay awake. She listened to the profound, pressing silence of the castle. She thought of the caretaker's face, twisting into a mask of horror. She thought of the butler's spidery shadow. She thought of the maid with the face of mud and the food that tasted of decay. Stress, she told herself. Exhaustion. An overactive imagination primed by a Gothic setting. There were 100 rational explanations. But as she stared into the darkness, a sliver of moonlight fell upon the ornate carvings of the bed frame. She saw intertwined vines and flowers, exquisitely rendered. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw that the carvings were not of flowers, but of open, screaming mouths and contorted, emaciated limbs. She closed her eyes, but the image was burned onto the inside of her eyelids. She was not tired, she was not stressed, she was terrified, and she was utterly, completely alone. Chapter 2. The House Rules. Morning arrived not with a gentle dawn, but with a brilliant, theatrical burst of light. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting the bedroom in strokes of gold. Rowena woke with a start, her neck stiff. She had not so much slept as fallen into a few hours of tense, dream-haunted unconsciousness. Beside her, Declan was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed and pulling on his boots. He was humming. "Can you believe this place?" he said, his voice brimming with energy. "I was up at sunrise, walked the parapets. The view, Row, my God, you can see for miles. The stonework on the North Tower is 15th century, I'm almost certain. And it's in perfect condition, it defies belief." Rowena sat up. In the clean morning light, the horrors of the previous night seemed distant, almost foolish. The carved bed frame was just a bed frame. The wallpaper was just wallpaper. She must have been dreaming. She had to have been. "I'm going to start my preliminary survey today," Declan continued, his mind already racing. "I want to photograph every archway, every buttress. This is going to be the book of a lifetime." Downstairs, the castle was alive with a quiet, efficient hum. A fire was already blazing in the great hall. The air smelled of coffee and frying bacon. Sweet Myra was in the dining room, setting a pristine white cloth on the table, a cheerful song on her lips. Isla was already there, looking more animated than Rowena had seen her in years. "Myra's going to show me the stables after breakfast," Isla announced. "She says they have horses." "Finn is in the garden with Mr. Finch," Myra added, her smile unwavering. "He's fascinated by the sundial." Something cold trickled down Rowena's spine. The image of the butler's spidery shadow flashed in her mind. Finn is alone with him. Myra's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course not. He is perfectly safe. Mr. Finch is an exemplary custodian." Declan placed a reassuring hand on Rowena's shoulder. "Honey, it's fine. Let the kids explore. This is their home now, too." The day unfolded with a surreal domesticity. Declan disappeared with his camera and notebooks, a man possessed by historical fervor. The children seemed to be in a state of bliss. But Rowena could not shake the feeling of being watched, of a deep and profound wrongness that lurked just beneath the surface of the perfection. She saw Mr. Finch from a distance, standing unnaturally still in the center of the rose garden, Finn circling the sundial nearby. The butler did not move a muscle for 10 straight minutes. He just stood, a black exclamation point in a riot of color. Isla came running back from the stables, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, you have to see them. They're beautiful, 2 of them. Their coats shine. Myra says they're called glimmer hounds." "They're dogs, not horses," Rowena asked, confused. "No, silly, the horses are there too, big black ones. The hounds are special, they belong to the master. Ronan takes care of them." Isla's cheeks colored slightly at the mention of the name. He's the stable boy. Wanting to connect with her daughter to share in this new life, Rowena agreed to walk with Isla to the paddock. It was a short distance from the main keep, past a manicured hedge maze. 2 hounds were there, running in a wide, fenced field. They were magnificent, sleek, powerful animals that looked like a cross between a greyhound and a wolf. Their coats, one silver and one white, did seem to shimmer in the sunlight. Isla leaned on the fence, calling to them. "They're beautiful," Rowena admitted. The sight was soothing. These were real, solid animals. Her fears were foolish. Then one of the hounds stopped. It turned its head and looked directly at her. The world tilted. The glamour tore away like a rotten curtain. She was not looking at a sleek, beautiful hound. She was looking at a thing of bone and taut, mangy hide. It was canine in shape, but emaciated, its ribs starkly visible. Its jaw was too long, and as it opened its mouth it unhinged, splitting its face in a grotesque grin that reached almost to its ears, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Its eyes were not the intelligent eyes of a dog, but dark, empty pits. A dry, rasping sound, a horrid mimicry of laughter, issued from its throat. The other creature, the hunger grin, stopped its running and turned, its lipless grin mirroring its partner. Isla was still cooing at them. "Aren't they lovely? They seem to like you." Rowena's breath hitched. The skeletal things took a step towards the fence, towards her daughter. A primal scream tore from Rowena's throat. "Isla, get away from the fence, now." She lunged, grabbing Isla by the arm and yanking her back with all her strength. Isla stumbled, crying out in surprise and pain. "Mom, what are you doing? You're hurting me." Rowena spun her daughter around, shielding her with her own body, her eyes fixed on the monsters. They had stopped, their heads cocked, their empty eyes burning into her. Declan came running, drawn by the scream. "Ro, what happened? What's wrong?" He skidded to a halt beside them, his gaze going from Rowena's terrified face to the paddock. Rowena followed his eyeline. The 2 beautiful, shimmering hounds stood by the fence, tails wagging gently, their expressions curious and placid. The skeletal horrors were gone. "The dogs," Rowena whispered, her voice trembling. "They're not dogs." Declan put his arms around her. He looked deeply concerned. "Honey, they're just dogs. Look at them. They're perfectly friendly." Isla pulled away from her, rubbing her arm, her face a mask of anger and betrayal. "You're crazy. You screamed at them for no reason. You scared them." She ran back towards the castle, sobbing. Declan held Rowena, stroking her hair. "It's okay. You're overtired. The move has been a lot for you, for all of us." His voice was gentle, reasonable. He was gaslighting her, she realized, but he didn't know it. He was trying to soothe a woman he thought was breaking down. Her terror was being repackaged as a symptom. "We need to get some things from the village," she said later, her voice flat. She needed to get out of the castle. She needed to see normal people, normal buildings. She needed to breathe air that didn't taste of secrets. The drive to the village of Aucturfiern was a tense affair. Declan tried to make small talk, pointing out landmarks, but Rowena could only give monosyllabic replies. Isla sat in the back, silent and sullen. The village was a small, grim collection of gray stone houses huddled around a single main street. It was the absolute opposite of the castle's pristine fantasy. It was real. The air smelled of coal smoke and wet sheep. It was the most comforting thing Rowena had smelled in 2 days. Declan pulled up outside a small shop with a faded sign that read Moragis Provisions. Inside, the shop was cramped and smelled of dried herbs and waxed paper. An older woman with a severe face and sharp, intelligent eyes stood behind the counter. "Help you?" she asked, her voice as gray as the village stones. "Yes, we just moved in nearby," Declan said cheerfully. "Need to stock up on a few basics. Milk, bread, the like." The woman, Morag, began to gather the items, her movements brisk and efficient. "Staying long." "We've bought the place, actually," Declan said, a note of pride in his voice. "Blackwood Keep." Morag froze. The carton of milk in her hand paused midair. She did not look at them. She placed the milk on the counter with deliberate care. Her face, which had been merely severe, was now a closed, blank wall. "Is that so?" she said. It was not a question. Rowena stepped forward. "Do you know the castle, the history?" Morag's eyes flickered towards Rowena for a second, a quick, sharp assessment. She turned away, bagging their items. "Some places have deep roots. Best not to disturb them." "The previous caretaker mentioned a master," Rowena pressed, desperate for something, anything. "Do you know who owns the estate?" Morag finished bagging their groceries and pushed the bag across the counter. The total was written on a small chalkboard. She did not answer the question. As Declan paid, Morag's sharp eyes met Rowena's one last time. There was no pity in them. There was only a grim, settled knowledge, the look of someone who knows a tragedy is inevitable and has long since made her peace with not getting involved. "The old lords always kept their own pantry well stocked," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Never had need of the village." The message was clear: you are on your own. The drive back to the castle was silent. The brief respite of the real world had evaporated, leaving only the validation of Morag's fear. She knew. The whole village probably knew. That evening, Mr. Finch approached them as they sat in the great hall, trying to read. "A message from the master," the butler announced in his toneless voice. Rowena suppressed a shudder. "He requests your presence in the dining hall. There are some house rules he wishes to impart for the safety and comfort of all." In the dining hall, the handsome caretaker, their master, stood before the great fireplace, a glass of red wine in his hand. He smiled his charming, empty smile. "Welcome, Mathesons. I trust you are settling in well," he asked. "Very well, thank you," Declan said. "The castle is a wonder." Excellent. To ensure it remains so, a few small courtesies are observed. The West Wing is private. It contains my personal effects, and I would ask you to respect that. The children, delightful as they are, should be discouraged from playing near the old well in the courtyard after dusk. It is structurally unsound. And finally, we do not go out onto the knoll behind the castle at night. The ground is treacherous. Simple things, you understand, for everyone's well-being. They were presented as reasonable requests, the eccentricities of an old house. But Rowena heard them for what they were: threats, boundaries, cages. Later, she went to tuck Finn into his bed in the nursery. She found sweet Myra sitting in a rocking chair beside the bed, telling him a story. And the little goblin polished the buttons until they shone like tiny moons. Myra was saying in her melodious voice. Finn was rapt, but Rowena did not see a rosy-cheeked maid. She saw the mermaiden. The creature of mud and weeds sat in the chair, its dripping form staining the priceless antique. A smell like a churned-up riverbed filled the room. Its voice was not a lilting song, but a low, wet gurgle that seemed to form words from the suction of mud. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She rushed forward and snatched Finn from his bed, pulling him into her arms. He was warm and solid against her. "Mom," he cried, startled and angry. "She was telling me a story." "It's time for sleep," Rowena said, her voice shaking. She carried him out of the room, not daring to look back at the thing in the chair. But as she closed the door, she saw Myra's head turn. In her glamorous form, her face was a picture of wounded innocence. But Rowena saw the lipless gash in the mud face twist into a snarl, and the eyes, like pits of stagnant water, glinted with a cold, ancient malice. Downstairs, Declan was waiting for her. He had a worried, pained look on his face. "Ro, we need to talk," he said softly. "Your behavior, screaming at the dogs, your rudeness to Myra just now. Isla is terrified of you. Finn is confused. You're not yourself." "That thing is not a woman, Dec," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't see it. You don't see any of it. What I see is my wife, who I love, acting erratically. I see her frightening our children." He took her hands. They were cold as ice. "We have to make this work, Ro. This is our one big chance, our future. I need you with me. I need you to be rational." He was pleading with her. He thought she was losing her mind. And as she looked at his earnest, loving, completely blind face, a chasm opened between them. She was utterly alone, the sole sane person in a house of beautiful madness. Her protector had become her warden. The castle was no longer a home. It was a prison, and the inmates were her own family. Chapter 3: The Price of a Song. The music started a few nights later. It began without preamble, a soft, ethereal melody that seemed to come from the very walls of the castle. Rowena was in the library, a place she had begun to treat as a sanctuary. It was the one room where the sense of wrongness was muted, replaced by the dry, comforting smell of old paper and leather. Declan was in his study, happily cataloging photographs. The children were asleep. The melody was beautiful. It was a harp, impossibly complex and poignant, a tune that spoke of ancient sorrows and deep, abiding peace. It was the most beautiful music she had ever heard, and it terrified her. She walked out into the great hall. The sound was stronger here. It emanated from the far corner where a massive, ornate harp stood in the shadows. No one was near it. The strings vibrated visibly in the dim light, plucked by an unseen hand. Declan emerged from his study, a look of wonder on his face. "Do you hear that? It's the harp. It plays itself. Can you imagine?" Rowena could imagine all too well. She walked closer, her feet leaden. The beautiful melody filled the air, so perfect it hurt to listen to. But underneath it, just at the edge of her hearing, she perceived another sound. A discordant, painful noise. A sound like wind whistling through cracks in bone. A sound of grief. She focused on the harp. The golden frame, carved with angels and vines, shimmered. She stared, forcing her eyes to see past the illusion. The glamour resisted. It was strong here, woven into the music itself. But her fear was stronger. The image flickered. The golden frame became a frame of yellowed, polished bone. A massive humanoid ribcage fused together unnaturally. The strings were not gold wire but taut, pale sinew. The beautiful music was a lie. The sound she now heard clearly was a chorus of agony, the trapped resonance of 1,000 screams captured in the bone. A wave of dizziness and nausea washed over her. The music was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at her. She backed away, pressing her hands to her ears, but the sound was inside her head now. She fled up the stairs, the beautiful, torturous melody chasing her. The next day the house was quiet, too quiet. Rowena found Declan in his study, but Isla's room was empty. A cold knot of dread formed in Rowena's stomach. She found her daughter's jacket missing from its hook. She went to the window, scanning the grounds. She saw her. Isla was walking near the paddock, her head tilted up, talking animatedly. Beside her walked a young man. He was handsome, with tousled brown hair and a charming, easy smile. He wore the simple clothes of a stable hand. This had to be Ronan. Rowena watched them, her heart pounding. The boy gestured towards the stables. Isla laughed, a bright, happy sound that drifted up to the window. As Rowena stared, the image wavered. The handsome boy dissolved. In his place stood a tall, gaunt creature made of slick, wet reeds and dark river stones. Its skin was the color of mud, and water dripped from its lank, weed-like hair. Its teeth, visible in a wide smile, were a collection of sharp, gray pebbles. It was the kelpie from the old tales, the water horse that lures young women to its depths. It laid a hand on Isla's shoulder, its long, webbed fingers caressing her jacket. It was guiding her towards the stables, towards the deep, dark well in the courtyard, towards the water. Rowena flew from the room, her feet barely touching the stairs. She burst out of the castle doors, shouting her daughter's name. "Isla, Isla, get here now." Isla turned, her face instantly clouded with annoyance. The stable boy, Ronan, took a step back, his charming face a mask of polite confusion. The glamour was strong. He looked so real, so harmless. "What is it now?" Isla demanded as Rowena reached them, breathless. "You are not to see him again," Rowena said, her voice low and fierce. She stood between Isla and the creature. She did not look at it. She was afraid of what it would do if it knew she could see its true form. "You can't be serious," Isla scoffed. "Why? Because you've decided he's a monster too, like the dogs, like Myra. Get to the castle. Now we will discuss it there." No, Isla's voice rose, cracking with teenage fury. I woe. He's the only person in this horrible place who's nice to me. You're just trying to ruin everything because you're miserable. The words were a physical blow. Rowena saw Ronan's charming smile flicker. For a second, the creature's wet, pebbled teeth were visible. It was enjoying this. It was feeding on the discord. Go to your room, Isla, Rowena commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. This is not a request. With a final, hateful glare, Isla turned and stormed towards the castle. Rowena remained, her back to the Kelpie. She could feel its cold gaze on her. She could smell the river rot. After a long, silent moment, she heard the soft squelch of its footsteps as it retreated towards the stables. The confrontation with her daughter was brutal. Isla screamed, she cried, she accused Rowena of jealousy, of madness. Nothing Rowena could say made a difference. How could she explain a monster that only she could see? In the end, she simply forbade it, a tyrannical decree that drove the wedge between them deeper than ever. That evening, the gilded gentleman found them in the great hall. His golden eyes were bright, his smile warmer than usual. "My dear Mathesons," he began, his voice like silk, "to celebrate your settling in and to smooth over the small frictions of a new home, I would be honored if you would join me for a special dinner tonight, a formal welcome." He looked from Declan's hopeful face to Isla's sullen one, to Rowena's stony expression. Attendance would be most appreciated. It was not an invitation, it was a summons. Desperate, Rowena returned to the library. The house was against her, her family was against her. There had to be an answer here, a clue. She ran her hands over the leather-bound books, pulling out estate ledgers, farm journals, anything that looked old. Most were filled with dry accounts of crops and livestock. She found it in a small, leather-bound diary tucked behind a row of agricultural texts. The script was feminine, a frantic, spidery scrawl. It was dated 1888. The entries were short, disjointed. October 3rd. The house wears a veil. My husband calls it beautiful. I see the rot beneath. October 10th. The roses have thorns as long as my fingers. Cook served us a joint of beef today. I saw maggots in the meat. No one else noticed. They called me hysterical. October 19th. The music, it never stops. It is beautiful and it is agony. October 25th. They demand a song, a price for the beauty. They say the land requires a tribute, a gift of thanks. I saw the master smile. It was not a smile, it was a promise of pain. The final entry was almost illegible. November 1st. He says our youngest, Mary, has a sweet voice, sweeter than mine, a song. He says a song is all they ask. The diary ended there. A cold sweat broke out on Rowena's skin. A song. The land requires a tribute. She slammed the book shut. The dinner was a lavish affair. The long table was covered in white linen and set with gleaming silver. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The gilded gentleman sat at the head of the table, the perfect host. Declan, eager to mend the rifts in the family, was jovial. Isla was silent, picking at her food. Even Finn was subdued. Ronan, the stable boy, stood against the wall near the kitchens, a silent observer. To everyone else, he was a handsome servant. To Rowena, He was a dripping water demon, patiently waiting. The food was exquisite, and Rowena saw no overt sign of the rot. The glamour was powerful tonight, thick and cloying. But she could not eat. The words from the diary screamed in her mind. After the main course, the gilded gentleman raised his glass. "To my new tenants, the Matheson family, may your time at Blackwood keep be long and fruitful." He drank, his golden eyes settled on Isla. "I am told," he said, his voice soft, "that we have a songbird in our midst, young Isla." Declan beamed with pride. "She has a lovely voice, had the lead in her school musical last year." "A tribute," the gentleman said, the word landing like a stone in the silence. "The land has been so welcoming. It is an old custom, a small gift of thanks, a song perhaps to honor the house." Isla looked up, surprised. She glanced at Ronan, who gave her a subtle, encouraging nod. A faint blush rose on her cheeks. The request was flattering. It made her special. "Go on, sweetie," Declan urged. "Sing for us." I don't know," Isla demurred, but she was already pleased at the idea. "Please," the gentleman purred. "A simple tune is all the land asks." Isla stood up. She was nervous, but she was also a performer. She took a breath, smoothed her dress, and began to sing. It was an old folk song her grandmother had taught her, a simple, clear melody. Her voice was pure and strong, filling the vast dining hall. It was beautiful, and as the first notes left her lips, Rowena saw it happen. The glamour around her daughter began to shimmer, to warp. The song was not just a performance. It was a transaction. It was payment. It was weaving Isla into the fabric of this place, binding her to it with the threads of her own voice. Rowena looked at the gilded gentleman. The handsome face dissolved, revealing the Lord of Tatters beneath, its stitched mouth stretched in a triumphant leer. From the kitchen doorway, the gristle render, the monstrous chef, leaned out, its stone-like molars grinding in anticipation. At the foot of the table, where the shimmering hounds had been lying, the hunger grins now sat, drool dripping from their unhinged jaws. They were all listening. They were all feeding on the song. The diary. A song is all they ask. It was a lie. It was never all they asked. It was only the beginning. "Stop," Rowena whispered, but her voice was lost in the melody. Isla's voice grew stronger, more confident. She was lost in the music, in the rapt attention of the room. Rowena pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly on the stone floor. She stood up, her entire body shaking with a terror so profound it felt like rage. "Stop singing," she screamed, the sound tearing from her raw throat. She lunged across the corner of the table, grabbing for her daughter, trying to physically stifle the sound, to pull her away from the predators that surrounded her. The scene erupted into chaos. Isla cried out in shock. Declan jumped up, grabbing Rowena's arms. "Ro, what in God's name are you doing?" he shouted, trying to restrain her. "Don't you see?" she shrieked, struggling against him, her eyes wild. "It's a trap, he's taking her." She pointed a trembling finger at the Lord of Tatters, who watched the scene with cold, detached amusement, the glamour of the handsome man flickering back into place. But Finn was not looking at his mother or his father or the master of the house. His eyes were wide, fixed on a dark corner of the room near the hearth. A shadow there seemed to deepen, to thicken. It detached itself from the wall. It was a small, hunched thing, no bigger than a child, with long arms and a gnarled, wizened face. It wore a filthy woolen cap on its head. As it stepped from the shadows into the candlelight, the cap was revealed to be a dark, stained crimson, the color of old, dried blood. The red cap took a slow, shuffling step towards Finn. It grinned, a hideous expression that revealed a mouthful of sharp, pointed teeth, and no one saw it but him and her. Chapter 4: The Stained Cap. The chaos in the dining hall was a tangled knot of sound and motion. Declan wrestled with Rowena, his face a mask of disbelief and fear for her sanity. Isla stood frozen, her song cut short, tears of humiliation and anger welling in her eyes. The gilded gentleman watched, his expression one of perfect, feigned concern, while the Kelpie, Ronan, took a proprietary step closer to Isla. But Rowena's struggle, her frantic screaming, had created a crack in the castle's oppressive composure. And through that crack, something else had slipped. Rowena saw it at the same moment Finn did. The creature that shuffled from the shadows was pure nightmare, an entity untouched by the castle's beautiful illusions. It was small and sinewy, its skin the color of old parchment. Its movements were a horrible parody of an old man, but its speed was unnatural. It was focused entirely on Finn, who had scrambled back from the table, his small face white with terror. "Finn!" Rowena shrieked, finding a new, desperate strength. She wrenched one arm free from Declan's grasp and shoved him away. She launched herself towards her son, vaulting over a fallen chair. The red cap was fast. It covered the distance to Finn in a series of grotesque, loping bounds. It reached out a long, clawed hand, its fingers like yellowed bone. Rowena was too far away. She would not make it in time. A flash of black and a sharp, clicking sound cut through the air. Mr. Finch, the butler, moved with a speed that defied his rigid posture. He was no longer gliding, he was a blur. He interposed himself between Finn and the red cap, his body a stiff, dark barrier. For the first time, Rowena saw him not as a man, but as the spindly man, the insectoid horror of her visions. One of his long, unnaturally jointed arms shot out, not to strike, but to block. The red cap skidded to a halt, its claws inches from Mr. Finch's severe black suit. It hissed, a sound like steam escaping a cracked pipe, and bared its needle-like teeth. It looked from the impassive butler to the gilded gentleman, who now stood, his handsome face for once showing a flicker of genuine annoyance. "That is enough," the gentleman said. His voice had lost its silken edge. It was flat, cold, and absolute. It was the voice of a master chiding a disobedient pet. The red cap let out a frustrated snarl, its eyes, like beads of black glass, darting between Finn and its master. With a final, hateful hiss, it turned and shuffled back into the shadows, melting away as if it had never been there. The immediate danger was gone, but the air in the room was thick with its malice. Finn was catatonic with fear, his small body trembling violently. Rowena scooped him into her arms, holding him tight, shielding him with her body. She looked at Mr. Finch, who straightened his suit, his face once again a blank mask of Butlerian decorum. He had saved her son. The monster had saved her son from another monster. The thought was a dizzying paradox. Did the Fae have rules, a hierarchy? Was there a distinction between torment and outright murder? Declan rushed to her side, his face ashen. What was that? What in God's name was that thing? He had seen it. The glamour had shattered for him just for a moment. He had seen the red cap. The confirmation sent a wave of chilling relief through Rowena. She was not mad. It was real. "I told you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I told you this place was wrong." The gilded gentleman glided towards them, his handsome facade perfectly restored. A most unfortunate incident. An old pest. From the deeper parts of the castle, I must apologize. It has been many years since one has been so bold. Declan stared at him, dumbfounded. Pest, that thing was going to attack my son. And it was stopped, the gentleman said smoothly, his golden eyes flicking towards Mr. Finch. As you can see, you are perfectly safe here. The household is well equipped to deal with such nuisances. He was reframing the terror, twisting it into a demonstration of their safety. He was already patching the cracks, rebuilding the walls of their beautiful prison. Rowena could see the conflict on Declan's face, the memory of the grotesque creature warring with the reassuring presence of the handsome man, the pristine castle. The rational part of his mind was desperately seeking an explanation that made sense, and the gentleman was handing him one on a silver platter. "I think we'll retire for the evening," Declan said, his voice strained. He took Finn from Rowena. The boy was limp, unresponsive. "Come on, Isla." Isla, who had watched the entire exchange with wide, terrified eyes, said nothing. She followed her father and brother from the room, casting a final, fearful glance not at the gentleman but at her mother. Rowena had been right, and that somehow was the most terrifying thing of all. Rowena did not follow. She remained in the dining hall facing the Fae. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice low and shaking. "A red cap," the gentleman replied, taking a sip of his wine. "An ancient and witless creature. It is drawn to blood. It must keep its cap wet, you see. A rather tedious obsession. It was going to kill my son." "It is what it does," he said with a dismissive shrug. "But it will not be permitted to. Not yet. There are rules. There is a proper order to things, a process. You were interrupting a delicate transaction with your daughter. The red cap was merely an opportunist." The cold, casual nature of his explanation was more horrifying than any scream. He spoke of her children's lives as commodities, as pieces in a game with arcane rules. "Why did he stop it?" she asked, nodding towards Mr. Finch, who stood, silent and still, by the door. "Mr. Finch understands the master's wishes. The boy's fear was not yet ripe. The red cap would have spoiled the harvest." He smiled his empty smile. "Patience is a virtue, Mrs. Matheson, one you would do well to learn." He turned and left the dining hall. The Kelpie, Ronan, followed him, casting a final, cold look at Rowena, a look that said, "This changes nothing." Mr. Finch remained for a moment. He looked at Rowena, and for a fraction of a second she saw past the blank insectoid face. She saw a flicker of something ancient and weary, the resignation of a being bound to a service it may not have chosen. Then it was gone. He turned and glided from the room, leaving her alone in the wreckage of the evening. She found Declan in their bedroom. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Finn was asleep, tucked into his own bed in the adjoining room, the door left wide open. "You saw it, Deck," she said softly. He looked up at her, his face haggard. "I saw something. I don't know what it was. A trick of the light. A shadow." It was not a shadow. It was real. And the butler, a man, moved faster than my eyes could follow and stopped it. "How is that real? How is any of this real?" He ran his hands through his hair, his voice ragged with disbelief. "I have sunk everything we have into this house. My entire career is tied to this place. It has to be normal." "It's not," she said, her voice firm. "You know it's not. Morag in the village knew it. The diary knew it. Now you know it too." He stood up and began to pace, the measured, academic man replaced by a caged, frightened animal. "So what do? We can't just leave. We have no money, nowhere to go. This is it. We have to find a way to coexist." Coexist with things that want to harvest our children's fear, with creatures that want to kill them to dye a hat. "The gentleman said we were safe. He said it wouldn't happen again." The desperation in his voice was pathetic. He was clinging to the lies of the monster because the truth was too unbearable. The argument went on for hours, a circular, whispered battle in the dead of night. Declan, his academic mind scrambling for logic, tried to impose a framework on the madness. He theorized they were dealing with a reclusive, eccentric landlord who used theatrical effects to maintain his privacy. He suggested hallucinogens in the water supply, a shared delusion brought on by stress. He presented every possibility except the one staring him in the face. Rowena, exhausted and vindicated in the most horrible way, refused to yield. The castle was a predator. The staff were its appendages. They were not tenants, they were prey. Their war of words was interrupted by a small sound from the adjoining room. A soft, childish whimper. Rowena went to Finn, bedside. He was thrashing in his sleep, his face slick with sweat. "The hat," he mumbled, his eyes screwed shut. "The red hat, it's wet." She sat on the bed, stroking his hair, murmuring soothing words she did not believe. She felt a profound, primal rage building within her. They had terrified her son. They had marked him. Whatever truce Declan was trying to broker was a fool's errand. This was not a negotiation. It was a war, and she was the only one willing to fight it. She stayed by Finn's side until his breathing evened out. She walked back into the master bedroom. Declan had stopped packing. He was standing by the window, looking out at the oppressive darkness. "I found something," he said, his voice quiet. "While you were with Finn, I was looking through some of the old estate maps, trying to find a rational explanation for the private West Wing." He had a large, rolled-up piece of parchment spread on the desk. It was a detailed architectural drawing of the castle's ground floor. "The West Wing doesn't exist," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "According to the original plans, the official plans filed with the county, the castle ends here." He drew a finger along a thick wall on the map. "This whole section of the house, the gentleman's private quarters, it's not on any official record. It's not supposed to be here." Rowena looked at the map, then at the dark hallway that led towards the forbidden wing. The master's quarters, the heart of the rot. "And there's more," Declan said. He pointed to a small, circular shape drawn in the center of the main courtyard. It was labeled simply well. The well the gentleman warned us about. Look at the stonework pattern. He traced it. It's not just a well, it's a capstone. It's designed to seal something. He finally looked at her, his eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. The academic had found his proof. The evidence was irrefutable, and it pointed to a conclusion far more terrifying than any ghost story. They were living in a house that was physically impossible, a house with a phantom limb filled with monsters. The rational world he clung to was peeling away, revealing the abyss beneath. "We have to get the children out," Rowena said, her voice low and urgent. Declan nodded, his face grim. "Tomorrow, at first light, we'll say we have a family emergency. We'll pack one bag and we'll just run." It was a plan, a fragile, desperate plan, but it was the first time in days they had been united. Rowena allowed herself a flicker of hope, but as she looked out the window past Declan's shoulder, she saw something that extinguished it. Far below, on the great lawn, two pinpricks of light were moving. It was the corpse scandals, the floating, disembodied eyeballs of her visions. They were not wandering aimlessly. They were moving in a slow, deliberate patrol around the perimeter of the castle. A silent, sleepless, unblinking patrol. They were not tenants. They were prisoners, and the guards were making their rounds. Chapter 5: The Woven Warning. The plan was simple, born of late-night panic. They would wake the children before dawn. They would tell them their grandmother was ill, a sudden, urgent crisis that required their immediate departure. They would pack a single emergency bag, leaving everything else behind as a sign of their intent to return. They would get in the car and drive away, and they would never look back. But the castle had other ideas. When the alarm on Declan's watch beeped, it was still dark outside. A thick, unnatural fog pressed against the windows, swallowing the world. It was not the gentle mist of the highlands. It was a dense, suffocating blanket of gray, rendering visibility to near zero. "A fog," Declan whispered, his voice tight. "We can't drive in this." "It's the house, Dec," Rowena said, already dressing in the dark. "It knows it's trying to keep us here." "Don't be ridiculous, it's weather. It'll burn off when the sun comes up." But his voice lacked conviction. They went to wake the children. Isla was groggy and resentful, her anger from the previous night still simmering. But the news of her grandmother's illness was enough to override it with a sullen compliance. Finn was another matter. He woke up screaming. "The man with the wet hat!" he cried, scrambling to the far corner of his bed, pulling the covers over his head. "He's in the dark." It took them nearly an hour to calm him, an hour of precious time wasted. By the time he was dressed, his small body trembling, the first hints of a weak gray light were filtering through the fog. And downstairs the house was already awake. The smell of coffee and bacon, usually so welcoming, was a sign of their failure. As they descended the grand staircase, their single bag in Declan's hand, they found Mr. Finch standing at the bottom, as if he had been waiting for them. "Good morning," the butler said in his flat, toneless voice. "Cook has prepared breakfast." "We won't be staying for breakfast, thank you, Finch," Declan said, trying to sound casual. "We've had some bad news from home, a family emergency. We have to leave for a few days." Mr. Finch did not react. He simply stood there, a silent, impassive obstacle. The master was hopping to show you the tapestry this morning. He feels it is an important part of the castle's heritage. Some other time, Declan said, trying to move past him. Mr. Finch took a single, gliding step, effortlessly blocking their path to the front door. The master insists. The politeness was gone. It was a command. Rowena saw the flicker of the spindly man, the rigid, insectoid creature beneath the suit. Its featureless face was turned towards them. There was no negotiating. The gilded gentleman was waiting for them in the great hall, standing before the massive tapestry that depicted the noble hunt. He smiled his gracious smile. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I do hope it is not serious." "Our mother is very ill," Declan lied. "A shame," the gentleman said, "but you cannot leave just yet. I promised you a history lesson." He gestured to the tapestry. Its woven threads seemed to glow in the dim morning light. "This piece is unique. It is the story of this house, the story of the pact between the first laird and the gentry of the knoll." He began to walk along the length of the tapestry, pointing out scenes. To Declan and the children, it was a beautiful work of art. Knights on proud horses, ladies in fine gowns, hounds straining at the leash, and in the background beautiful elfin figures watching from the trees. But Rowena saw the truth. She saw the flayed tapestry. The figures were not woven from thread but from strips of cured, tanned human skin. The horses' eyes were glass beads, but the eyes of the human figures were real, tiny, and shrunken, and they followed her as she moved. The beautiful fae were not elfin. They were monstrous things of thorn and shadow. "The first laird was a clever man," the gentleman narrated. "He wanted a castle, and the gentry wanted a permanent bridge to the mortal world, a place of power, an anchor. A deal was struck. The castle was built in a single night." He pointed to a scene of men and fae working together, raising the stone towers. But Rowena saw fae creatures whipping bent, emaciated human slaves. In return for this magnificent home, the laird and his descendants promised the gentry their respect, their belief, and an occasional offering, a tribute, to keep the pact strong. His finger traced a line to a new scene, a feast. The laird's family was dining with the beautiful fae. A young girl, no older than Isla, was singing for them. "A song," the gentleman said, his golden eyes locking onto Isla's. "A promise of a life to be given in service, a token of esteem." "And what happens when the pact is broken?" Rowena asked, her voice cold. The gentleman's smile widened. He moved to the final section of the tapestry, a dark, chaotic scene of battle and flame. "The pact is never broken, Mrs. Matheson. It is merely renegotiated." He tapped a figure at the edge of the scene. It was a woman, her face contorted in a silent scream. She was being dragged towards the woods by shadowy figures. She looked exactly like the woman from the diary. And then the tapestry changed. Before their eyes, the threads of the final scene began to move. They writhed and rewove themselves like a nest of worms. New figures appeared. A man with a camera, a teenage girl with a sullen expression, a small boy with wide, terrified eyes, and a woman with Rowena's face being pulled down into the dark, wet earth of the knoll. Isla gasped. Declan stared, his face draining of color. They saw it. For a moment the glamour had dropped for all of them. They saw the grotesque, flayed skin. They saw their own horrified faces woven into the tapestry of the damned. "What is this sorcery?" Declan stammered, backing away, pulling the children with him. "Not sorcery, history," the gentleman corrected. "The past, the present, and the future, all woven together. You see, your family is a part of the story now. You cannot simply leave. You have a role to play." He snapped his fingers. From the stables, the sound of barking began. Not the cheerful sound of normal dogs, but the dry, rasping laughter of the hunger grins. They were loose. From the hallway leading to the kitchens, the gristle render appeared, the bloated chef, wiping its greasy hands on a stained apron. It blocked the back entrance. Mr. Finch stood at the front door. They were surrounded. "Let us go," Declan said, his voice shaking but firm. He pushed the children behind him, standing beside Rowena. The terror had finally galvanized him. They were united. "But the story is not yet finished," the gentleman said, his voice losing all pretense of warmth. "And I am a great patron of the arts. I will see it completed." The moment stretched, taut and silent. The rasping of the hunger grins grew louder as they approached the castle. The gristle render took a heavy, shuffling step forward. Then from upstairs a new sound, a frantic, rhythmic tapping. Tap, 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 tap. Everyone looked up towards the second-floor landing. The tapping came from inside one of the walls. It was a desperate, urgent sound. The ghost of the mason, the first victim, was sending a warning. The gentleman's head snapped up, his face contorted with fury. The distraction had broken his control of the scene. "Silence that," he hissed at Mr. Finch. But the distraction was all they needed. Declan grabbed a heavy, iron poker from the fireplace. Rowena grabbed the children's hands. "The library," she yelled. It was a dead end, but it was their only option. They ran. They scrambled past the grand staircase, Declan holding the poker like a sword. A useless gesture against these creatures, but a gesture of defiance all the same. They burst into the library and slammed the heavy oak door shut, throwing the bolt. They were trapped. The heavy thud of the gristle render's footsteps approached the door. The laughter of the hunger grins echoed from the hall. They could hear the gentleman shouting orders in a language that was not human. "The window!" Declan yelled, rushing to the large bay window at the far end of the room. He tugged at the latch. It was fused with rust. He slammed his shoulder against it, but it wouldn't budge. He smashed the poker against the glass. The diamond-paned window cracked, but the leaden frame held firm. The library, which had been Rowena's sanctuary, was now their tomb. The heavy oak door began to shake in its frame as the gristle render threw its weight against it. A hinge groaned, the sound of screaming metal. Isla was sobbing, huddled in a corner with Finn. Declan was frantically searching for another escape route, another weapon. Rowena stood, her back to the bookshelves, her mind racing. The tapping from the walls had stopped, but its rhythm was stuck in her head. Tap, Tap tap, it wasn't random, it was a code, Morse code. SOS. Her eyes darted around the room. The ghost of the mason had tried to warn them. He had been trapped in the walls for centuries. He knew the castle's secrets. Where was he tapping? He was trying to lead them somewhere. The door shuddered again, a splintering crack appearing near the lock. They had seconds. Rowena ran her hands along the spines of the books on the wall where the door was. She was looking for something, anything. A loose panel, a hidden switch. Her fingers brushed against a row of agricultural texts. Behind them, she felt a small, hollow space. It was where she had found the diary. She pulled the books out, her hands clumsy with haste. Behind them, recessed into the wall, was a small iron ring, no bigger than her thumb. It was attached to what looked like a panel in the woodwork, a secret door. "Deck here," she shouted. He ran to her side. The main door groaned again, the wood beginning to splinter. Declan grabbed the ring and pulled. It wouldn't move. He put his foot against the wall and pulled with all his strength. With a loud crack, the panel swung inwards, revealing a dark, narrow opening. A wave of cold, musty air, the smell of damp earth and stone, washed over them. It was a hidden passage. "Go," Declan yelled, pushing Isla and Finn towards the opening. "Go now." Isla scrambled through, pulling her brother after her. Rowena followed, her heart in her throat. Declan came last, pulling the secret panel shut behind them just as the library door burst open with a crash of splintering wood. They were plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. Chapter 6: The Earth's Veins. The darkness was total. It was a physical presence, a thick, cold weight that pressed in from all sides. The air tasted of ancient dust and the deep, mineral tang of wet stone. The only sounds were their own ragged breaths, the terrified whimpers from Isla and Finn, and the muffled, furious shouting from the library on the other side of the stone panel. "Mom!" Finn's voice was a small, trembling thread in the vast blackness. "I can't see." "I know, sweetie. Stay close," Rowena whispered, her voice tight. She fumbled in her pocket, her fingers closing around the cool metal of her phone. She pulled it out, the sudden glare of the screen a violent shock to their dark-adapted eyes. The light carved a small, fragile bubble of visibility in the oppressive dark, revealing a narrow, descending passage. The walls were rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture that trickled down in slow, steady drips. The floor was uneven, sloping downwards at a steep angle. It was not a grand, secret staircase. It was a crude, forgotten artery within the castle's bones. "We have to move," Declan said, his voice low and urgent. "They know we're in the walls." He took the lead, holding his own phone aloft, its beam cutting a shaky path ahead. Rowena followed, holding Finn's hand tightly with Isla clutching the back of her jacket. The passage was claustrophobically narrow, forcing them to walk in single file. Their shoulders brushed against the cold, damp stone. The silence of the passage was unnerving, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Here, sound did not echo, it was swallowed by the stone. They descended for what felt like an eternity, the passage twisting and turning. The air grew colder, heavier. The smell of damp earth became stronger, mingled with a new, unpleasant scent. It was the smell of rot, of fungal decay. Pale, ghostly fungi grew in patches on the walls, some of them faintly phosphorescent, casting a sickly green-white glow that did little to comfort them. "Where are we going?" Isla asked, her voice shaking. "Where does this lead?" "Away," Declan said, though his voice lacked certainty. "Down and away." The passage leveled out and opened into a small, circular chamber. In the center stood a crude stone pedestal, and on it sat a small, leather-bound book. It was the diary Rowena had found. "How did this get here?" she breathed, reaching for it. "Don't touch it," Declan warned. "It could be a trap." But Rowena already had it in her hands. It fell open to a page she hadn't seen before, the frantic script covering the page. October 29th. The walls have veins. The mason told me before they took him. He built them for us a secret way. He called it the earth's grace, a path the gentry will not walk, for they despise the deep, unadorned stone. He said it leads to the old root cellar and from there to the outside. A chance. The mason, the ghost, he hadn't just been sending a warning. He had been guiding them to his final, desperate gift. Hope, sharp and painful, lanced through Rowena. "The root cellar," she said, her voice filled with a new energy. "It leads outside." A low, scraping sound echoed from the passage behind them. It was distant, but it was unmistakable. The sound of something heavy being dragged over stone. They were being followed. "Let's go," Declan urged, pushing them towards another opening on the far side of the chamber. The new passage was different. It was older, the stonework more crude. The floor was no longer stone but packed earth. Thick, gnarled roots like the petrified tentacles of some subterranean creature burst through the walls and ceiling, crisscrossing their path. They had to duck and climb over them. This was the earth's grace the mason had written about. They were passing below the castle now, in the very veins of the knoll itself. The scraping sound behind them grew louder, closer. It was accompanied by a wet, dragging noise and a faint, rhythmic clicking. "Faster," Declan said, his voice strained. They scrambled through the network of roots, the beams of their phones cutting frantic, dancing patterns in the darkness. Finn stumbled, and Declan swept him up into his arms without breaking stride. The air here was thick, difficult to breathe, saturated with the smell of decay. Rowena saw something pale on the packed earth floor. She pointed her light at it. It was a bone, a human rib coated in a thin layer of slime. Then she saw another, and another. They were walking through a graveyard. The clicking behind them was very close now. Rowena risked a glance back. Her light caught a shape moving in the darkness of the passage. It was the spindly man, Mr. Finch, but he was not walking upright. He was scuttling along the floor and walls on all six of his long, insectoid limbs, his featureless face pointed towards them, moving with a horrifying, unnatural speed. He was not walking in the passage. He was the passage. He was perfectly suited to this terrain. "He's right behind us," she screamed. Panic gave them a fresh burst of speed. They half ran, half fell through the root-choked tunnel. Up ahead, Declan's light caught something. It was a wall of fieldstone with a dark, rectangular shape set into it. A door. They reached it, breathless. It was a low, heavy door of weathered oak, with a simple iron latch. It was swollen with damp and stuck fast in its frame. "Help me," Declan grunted, throwing his shoulder against it. Rowena added her weight, pushing with all her might. The clicking of the spindly man was just yards away now. They could hear its sharp, chittering breaths. The door groaned, the wood scraping against the stone. With a final, desperate shove, it burst open, sending them tumbling out into a space that smelled of soil, rotting apples, and cold stone. They were in the root cellar. Declan slammed the door shut and fumbled with the heavy iron bar on their side, dropping it into its rusted brackets just as a tremendous force slammed against the door from the other side. The wood shuddered, but the bar held. A furious, high-pitched screeching came from the passage, the sound of a thwarted insect. It was followed by a series of heavy, rhythmic thuds as the creature threw its body against the door. They backed away, huddling together in the center of the cellar. The room was small, with stone walls and shelves laden with the dusty, mummified remains of long-forgotten vegetables. On the far wall was a set of stone steps leading up to another door, their exit. The pounding on the passage door stopped. An unnerving silence fell. "Is it gone?" Isla whispered. "I don't think so," Declan replied, his eyes fixed on the door. A thin, black tendril, no thicker than a wire, snaked out from under the door. It probed the air for a moment before retreating. Then another appeared, and another. The spindly man was trying to find a way to unlatch the bar or to ooze through the cracks. "We have to go," Rowena said, pulling the children towards the stone steps. The steps led up to a heavy, horizontal door set into the ceiling, a storm cellar door. Declan pushed against it. It lifted with a groan of rusted hinges, opening onto a world of gray. They were outside. They scrambled out one by one into the cold, damp air. The fog was still thick, but they could see they were on the far side of the castle, near the edge of the woods that bordered the knoll. They had made it. They were free. But as Declan climbed out, he let out a sharp cry of pain. Rowena spun around. One of the black, wire-like tendrils had snaked out from the cellar and wrapped around his ankle, pulling him back towards the opening. He kicked at it, but it was immensely strong, cutting into his flesh. Rowena reacted on pure instinct. She grabbed a large, heavy stone from the edge of the cellar opening and brought it down with all her force on the tendril. There was a sickening, wet crunch and the tendril severed. A thin, black ichor like tar spurted from the stump. A piercing shriek echoed from the cellar below. Declan scrambled away, his ankle bleeding freely. They ran. They plunged into the dense woods, the fog swirling around them, the trees reaching out like skeletal arms. They did not know where they were going, only that it was away from the castle, away from the knoll. They could hear sounds behind them, not just the screeching from the cellar, but new sounds. The rasping laughter of the hunger grins echoing through the fog. A high, clear hunting call from the gilded gentleman. They had escaped the house, but now they were in the hunting grounds, and the hunt had begun. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs ached. The fog disoriented them, turning the woods into a monochrome labyrinth. Every tree looked the same. Every direction felt wrong. Finn began to cry, his small body exhausted. "I can't run anymore." Declan, leaning heavily on Rowena, his face pale from pain and blood loss, scooped him up again. "We have to keep moving." They stumbled into a small clearing and stopped. In the center of the clearing stood a single, ancient rowan tree, its branches bare, its bark scarred and white, and at the base of the tree sat Morag, the village grocer. She sat on a small, three-legged stool, a wicker basket at her side. She looked up at them as they emerged from the fog, her sharp eyes taking in their torn clothes, Declan's bleeding ankle, the terror on their faces. Her expression did not change. It was as grim and unreadable as ever. "Took you long enough," she said, her voice dry as dead leaves. "I was about to pack up." She nodded towards the woods behind them from which the sounds of the hunt were drawing closer. "They don't like the rowan. Gives you a bit of a breather. Not for long, mind." Declan stared at her bewildered. You were waiting for us." "Someone has to," she said, reaching into her basket. She pulled out a small, heavy iron nail about 6 inches long and a strip of clean white cloth. "Heard the slewug on the wind last night. Knew you either be dead by dawn or you'd make a run for it." She tossed the cloth and nail to Rowena. "The ankle. The iron will bite him, but it's better than the Fae's poison. Wrap it tight." She looked at Declan. "You're bleeding on their land. They can follow the scent anywhere now. You're marked." Rowena, her hands shaking, knelt and began to clean Declan's wound as best she could. The gash from the tendril was deep, and the skin around it was already darkening, an ugly purple-black. "Who are you?" Rowena asked, looking up at the old woman. "How do you know all this?" Morag gave a short, mirthless laugh. "My great-grandmother was Mary, the girl with the sweet voice from your diary." The words hit Rowena like a physical blow. She didn't sing. Her older sister, my ancestor, threw a pail of milk at the master to stop her. An insult. They took Mary as payment for it. My family has been watching this house ever since, watching and waiting for it to claim another family. "You could have warned us," Declan said, his voice raw with accusation. "And you'd have listened," Morag retorted, her eyes like chips of flint. "A city man full of books and pride. You'd have called me a mad old woman and walked straight into the trap. Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be survived, if you're lucky." The howling of the hunger grins sounded closer now, a chorus of rasping hunger. "What do we do?" Rowena asked, her voice desperate. "Where can we go?" Morag looked at them, a long, calculating gaze. For the first time, a flicker of something that might have been pity crossed her face. "There's no running from them," she said. "Not once they have your scent, not once you're part of the story. You can't leave the board, you can only try to change the game." She pointed with her chin deeper into the woods away from the castle. "There's an old chapel, St. Giles's. It's a ruin, but the foundation stones are salted and the gate is iron. It's consecrated ground. They can't enter. It's your only chance to last the night." She stood up, picking up her stool and basket. "But getting there is your problem. They'll be on you as soon as you leave the safety of this tree." She paused, looking at Finn, who was huddled against Declan, his face buried in his father's coat. "The boy," Morag said. "They marked him with fear. They'll be drawn to him most of all." She reached into her basket one last time and pulled out a small, filthy woolen cap. It was a dark, stained crimson. "I found this in a trap last season," she said, her lip curled in disgust. "He'll be looking for it." She tossed the red cap's hat to Rowena. Maybe you can use it to draw the right one's attention. Fae are proud. They don't like their games being interrupted by their own kind. The woods fell silent. The howling had stopped. It was a new predatory silence. They were being stalked. Go now, Morag said, turning to leave. And try not to die. It's a mess to clean up. She disappeared into the fog as silently as she had appeared, leaving them alone under the stark white branches of the rowan tree. Chapter 7. The Consecrated Ground. The silence that followed Morag's departure was more terrifying than the howling. It was a thinking silence, the kind a predator makes when it is circling, watching, waiting for a sign of weakness. The fog-shrouded woods were no longer a generic, disorienting labyrinth. They were an arena, and the Mathesons were the prey. Declan, his face pale and slick with sweat, struggled to his feet. Rowena had wrapped his ankle tightly with the cloth, the heavy iron nail pressed against the wound as Morag had instructed. He hissed in pain as he put weight on it. She's right. We're sitting ducks here. Rowena clutched the redcap's filthy, blood-stained hat. The woolen fabric felt greasy and cold, imbued with a deep and ancient malice. The thought of using it, of deliberately calling that creature, made her stomach clench. The chapel, she said, forcing the words out. We have to make it to the chapel. They broke from the relative safety of the rowan tree, plunging back into the disorienting gray. They moved as quickly as they could, Declan leaning heavily on Rowena, Finn held tight in his father's arms, and Isla stumbling along behind them, her face a pale mask of shock. The silence held for a few agonizing minutes, and then the hunt resumed. It wasn't just the laughing howls of the hunger grins anymore. A clear, impossibly beautiful voice drifted through the trees, singing a wordless, enchanting melody. It was sweet Myra, the Merc Maiden. The song was a lure, designed to calm and confuse, to make them want to stop and listen. At the same time, a frantic rustling noise came from the canopy above, the sound of something large moving through the branches. They were being herded. The woods grew darker, the trees thicker. They burst through a line of ferns and saw it. Ahead of them was a low, crumbling stone wall, and beyond it, the skeletal ruin of a small chapel. Its roof was long gone, but the stone walls were mostly intact. A rusted iron gate hung crookedly on its hinges at the entrance. Consecrated ground. Safety. It was only 50 yards away, but standing between them and the gate was the gilded gentleman. He was no longer the charming laird. The glamour was gone, shed like an unnecessary skin. He stood in his true form, the Lord of Tatters, a horrifying effigy of bark and stitched skin. The yellow light of his eyes burned with cold fire. He was not blocking their path. He was waiting for them, a hunter confident that his prey had reached the end of its run. At his side, the two hunger grins paced impatiently, their skeletal bodies taut, their unhinged jaws dripping with anticipation. The story does not end here, the Lord of Tatters said, his voice the sound of grinding stones. It ends on the knoll. It ends with a scream and a final, sweet note of terror. Declan pushed Rowena and the children behind him, raising the fireplace poker. It was a pathetic weapon, but he held it like a sword. We're not going back. The Lord of Tatters let out a dry, rasping laugh, the same sound the hounds made. You have no choice. He raised a hand, a thing of twigs and rags, and pointed at Finn. The boy's fear is a delicacy, a vintage. It will be savored. As he spoke, Rowena saw a flicker of movement in the woods to their left. It was small, hunched, and moving with a furtive, angry energy. The red cap, drawn by the chaos, by the proximity of his stolen property. Moreg's words flashed in her mind. Fae are proud. They don't like their games being interrupted. It was a mad gamble, a choice between two different kinds of death, but it was their only choice. "Deck," she whispered, her voice low and urgent. "Get them to the gate. When I say run, you run, don't look back." "Row, what are you doing?" he hissed, his eyes fixed on the monsters before them. "Creating a diversion." Before he could argue, she stepped out from behind him. She held up the red cap's filthy hat, holding it for all to see. "Are you looking for this?" she shouted, her voice ringing out in the clearing. It was not directed at the Lord of Tatters, but at the woods. The effect was instantaneous. The red cap burst from the trees with a furious shriek. It saw its stolen cap in her hand, and its world narrowed to a single point of vengeful obsession. It ignored the Lord of Tatters, ignored the hounds, ignored everything but the woman who held its prize. At the same time, the Lord of Tatters's head snapped towards the goblin, his burning eyes filled with rage at the interruption. The carefully orchestrated hunt, the dramatic final confrontation, was being ruined by one of his witless, blood-crazed minions. "Run!" Rowena screamed. She hurled the cap, not at the red cap but high into the air, into the space between the goblin and the Lord of Tatters. Declan did not hesitate. He grabbed Isla's hand and ran, stumbling on his injured ankle but driven by adrenaline, a desperate, hobbling sprint for the iron gate. The red cap and the Lord of Tatters collided. The small, wiry goblin launched itself at the taller Fey Lord, clawing and biting, trying to get past him to its hat, which had landed on the damp earth. One of the hunger grins, loyal to its master, leaped at the red cap, its jaws snapping. The second hound, its attention diverted, spun and bounded after Declan and the children. Rowena ran. She sprinted after her family, her lungs on fire. She could hear the hound behind her, its rasping breath, the scrabble of its claws on the wet ground. The iron gate was feet away. Declan shoved Isla and Finn through the opening and turned, his face a rictus of terror, waiting for her. The hound lunged, its skeletal jaws closing on the back of Rowena's leg. The pain was immense, a searing, tearing agony. She screamed, falling forward, her outstretched hands landing on the cold, damp earth inside the chapel grounds. She was over the threshold. The moment her hands touched the consecrated ground, the hound let out a pained yelp, as if it had been burned. It scrambled back, its jaws smoking where they had made contact with her flesh, which was now protected by the chapel's aura. The creature stood just outside the gateway, snarling in frustration, its empty eyes burning with hatred. Rowena dragged herself fully inside, her leg a ruin of torn muscle and fabric. Declan was at her side instantly, tearing a strip from his own shirt to try and staunch the bleeding. Isla and Finn were huddled against the crumbling stone altar, sobbing. Outside the gate, the fight between the Fae had ended. The Lord of Tatters, enraged, had swatted the redcap aside like a fly. The small creature lay twitching on the ground. The master of the castle stood, his form seeming to waver with fury, and stared at the family huddled in the ruins. His hunt had failed. His prey had found sanctuary. "This changes nothing," his stony voice grated, echoing in the clearing. "The ground is holy, but the stones will crumble. The sun will set. You are merely delaying the end of the story. You are mine. This land has claimed you, and it will not be denied." He turned, the remaining hunger grin and the whimpering redcap slinking after him, and melted back into the fog. The woods fell silent once more. They were safe. For now. Chapter 8: The Unfinished Story. The hours that followed were a blur of pain, fear, and exhaustion. The heavy fog did not lift with the sun, which remained a weak, invisible presence behind the thick gray blanket. Time seemed to stand still. They were trapped in a single, unending moment of terrified limbo. Declan's academic mind, now fully accepting of the nightmare, took over. He assessed their situation with grim pragmatism. They had shelter, however crude. They had a defensible position for as long as the consecrated ground held its power. But they had no food, no water beyond the dew on the stones, and two serious injuries. His ankle was a swollen, blackened mass. Rowena's leg was worse. The bite from the hunger grin was deep and ragged, and a strange, cold numbness was spreading from the wound. He found a small, sheltered alcove in the ruins out of the wind, and made a bed of damp leaves for Isla and Finn. The children, exhausted by the terror, eventually cried themselves into a fitful, shallow sleep. Rowena lay against the crumbling altar, drifting in and out of consciousness. In her lucid moments, she watched Declan. He limped around the perimeter of the chapel, testing the stones of the low wall, checking the rusted iron of the gate. He was a scholar turned soldier, a man trying to impose logic onto a situation that had none. "The mortar is crumbling," he said, his voice a low whisper so as not to wake the children. He was right. It won't last forever, the power here. It feels thin, old. "Morag's family," Rowena murmured, her tongue thick. "They watched for generations. Why didn't they do something?" "What could they do?" Declan countered, sitting beside her, his face etched with a terrible, newfound understanding. "Burn it down. The Fae would rebuild it in a night. It's not a house. It's an idea, a story. It's anchored to this place. You can't kill a story with fire." He picked up the diary, which Rowena had somehow managed to hold onto through the entire chase. He flipped through the frantic, terrified pages. "She was just like us," he said quietly. "A family, a dream, and they just consumed her. They fed on her hope, her fear, her love for her children. And when she was gone, they just waited for the next story to begin." A horrifying thought occurred to Rowena. The gilded gentleman, the Lord of Tatters, is he the same one from the diary, from 1888? Declan was silent for a long time. "I don't think so," he said finally. "I think he's the first laird." He tapped the diary. "She wrote that the laird made a pact for the castle. He promised respect, belief, offerings. I think when he died, he became the first offering. His family after him, they don't just take victims, they take caretakers. The story needs a villain. When one is used up, another is chosen. They were not just food for the monsters. They were potential replacements. Declan, with his love for the castle's history, was a prime candidate to become the next handsome, charming host. Isla, with her romantic soul, could become the next sweet Myra. The thought was more chilling than any physical threat. As dusk began to fall, painting the gray fog with shades of bruised purple and orange, the sounds began again. A soft, beautiful harp melody drifted from the direction of the castle. The laughter of the Hunger Grins echoed in the distance. They were reassembling for the night's hunt. A new sound joined the chorus. A slow, rhythmic chanting in that alien, inhuman language the gentleman had used. It came from all around them, from just beyond the crumbling chapel walls. "What are they doing?" Isla asked, her voice trembling. She and Finn were awake now, huddled together for warmth and comfort. Declan peered over the wall. In the gathering gloom, he could see figures moving in the fog. Goblins, mermaidens, and other things for which he had no name. They were not attacking. They were marching in a slow, circular procession around the chapel. "They're breaking it down," he whispered in horror. "The consecrated ground. They're using their own power to unravel it." The stones of the wall began to vibrate faintly. A fine powder of dust trickled from the mortar between the blocks. The ancient protection was failing. Rowena knew, with a cold certainty that had nothing to do with her wound, that they would not survive the night. The story was reaching its conclusion. The Lord of Tatters would have his ending. They would be dragged back to the knoll, their screams unheard, their disappearance a local mystery, a footnote in the castle's long, bloody history, just another verse in its terrible song. But Declan's words echoed in her mind. "You can't kill a story. You can only try to change the game." A story needs an ending. But what if it wasn't their ending? What if it was the castle? "Deck," she said, her voice weak but clear. "The diary, the Laird made a pact." "Yes." "A pact has terms, rules. He promised them respect, belief, offerings." She pushed herself up, her eyes bright with a feverish, desperate idea. What if those terms are broken, not by us, by them? She looked at her children, at their pale, terrified faces. She looked at her husband, his academic curiosity twisted into a mask of grim survival. This was her family, her story, and she would not let a monster write the final chapter. "The tapestry," she said. "It showed the pact, men and fae working together. The gentry wanted an anchor to our world. The Laird wanted a castle." She took a ragged breath, the idea taking shape. "The Lord of Tatters, the Laird, he is bound by that pact too, but he's become a predator. He's not honoring his side of the bargain. He's just consuming. He's perverting the story." "What are you saying?" Declan asked, his eyes searching her face. "I'm saying a story has to be true to itself, and this one is built on a lie." She looked towards the looming, invisible silhouette of the castle in the fog. "The castle isn't a bridge anymore. It's a trap, and I think the knoll itself knows it." She grabbed the filthy, blood-soaked Redcap's hat. She looked at the iron nail they had used for Declan's bandage. She looked at the crumbling, consecrated stones around them. "They feed on fear," she whispered, "on hate, on our belief in their power." She met her husband's eyes, a silent communication passing between them, an understanding of the terrible, impossible gamble she was about to propose. It was a choice between a certain, horrific death and a sliver of a chance so thin it was almost invisible. The chanting outside grew louder. A large stone tumbled from the top of the wall, crashing to the ground. The protection was almost gone. The final scene was about to begin. Chapter 9: The Land's Rebuke. The ancient stones of the chapel groaned. The air, once protected and still, now crackled with a malevolent energy. The Fae's ritual was working. Their collective will grinding away the centuries of consecration like water on stone. The Lord of Tatters stood just beyond the crumbling gate, a silent, patient silhouette against the churning fog, waiting for the walls to fall. Inside the ruin, Rowena moved with the slow, deliberate purpose of someone who has accepted their fate and found a terrible clarity on the other side. She took the blood-stained Redcap's hat. With trembling hands, she tore a strip of fabric from its edge. "Deck," she said, her voice steady despite the pain that radiated from her leg. "The diary. What did the Laird offer the Fae? What was the first pact built on?" Declan, his face grim, scanned the frantic script of the diary in the fading light. Respect, belief, and a promise that the gentry would have a sanctuary, a home of truth in the mortal world, a place their nature would be honored. "A home of truth," Rowena repeated, the words tasting like iron and ash. "And he's turned it into a slaughterhouse." She looked at the piece of the Redcap's hat, then at the heavy iron nail from Moreg's basket. She saw not just two objects, but two symbols. The Redcap's bloody-minded, chaotic evil, and the pure, fair-appelling power of cold iron. "He's using their own natures against them," she whispered. "He directs the Kelpie's hunger, the Redcap's malice, the Merc-Maiden's despair. He orchestrates it. He broke the pact first." She looked at Declan, her eyes burning with a feverish, impossible plan. "A story has to be balanced. We can't fight him, but maybe the story itself can." Declan understood. It was an insane leap of logic, a desperate appeal to a set of rules they barely comprehended. But it was the only move left on the board. "Isla," Rowena said, her voice softening, "I need you to sing." Isla stared at her, her eyes wide with terror. "Sing? Mom, no, that's what started it. It's how he traps you." "Yes," Rowena said. "He used your song as a tribute to himself, to his own corrupt story. But a song is just power. It depends on who you sing it for." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. "Don't sing for him, don't sing for us. Sing for the knoll. Sing for the land they built this castle on. Sing about the pact that was broken, reminded of what it was promised." The chanting outside swelled to a crescendo. A large section of the wall collapsed with a roar, showering them with dust and rubble. The Lord of Tatters took a slow, triumphant step through the breach. The hunger grins followed, their skeletal forms slinking low to the ground. The game was over. "Now, Isla," Declan yelled, positioning himself between his family and the advancing Fae, the useless poker held before him like a talisman. Isla, her body trembling, closed her eyes. She took a ragged breath and began to sing. It wasn't the sweet folk song she had sung in the dining hall. This was something else. A keening, mournful sound, a melody born of pure terror and a sliver of desperate hope. It was a lament. She sang of a promise of sanctuary twisted into a prison. She sang of a home of truth filled with lies and glamour. Her voice, clear and pure, cut through the guttural chanting of the Fae. The Lord of Tatters paused. He tilted his head, a flicker of confusion on his horrifying, stitched-together face. This was not the sweet note of fear he had anticipated. This was an accusation. As Isla's song filled the air, Rowena took the heavy iron nail. Ignoring the searing pain, she knelt and drove the point of the nail into the damp, consecrated earth of the chapel floor. With a shard of fallen stone, she began to hammer it down, each strike sending a jolt of agony up her arm. Then she took the grimy strip of the redcap's hat. She pushed it deep into the hole she had made, packing the earth around it. She was making an offering, not to the castle, not to the Fae, but to the ancient, wild magic of the land itself. She was presenting it with proof of the pact's violation, the symbol of the Fae's own uncontrolled evil, driven into the ground by the one thing they could not abide, pure iron. The effect was cataclysmic. The ground beneath them did not shake, it writhed. A deep, groaning hum resonated up from the earth, a sound of immense geological displeasure. The Lord of Tatters stumbled back, a look of genuine shock on his face for the first time. The song, the offering, it was a combination the castle's corrupt magic could not process. It was an appeal to a higher, older authority. The roots that snaked beneath the knoll, the very veins of the earth they had fled through, began to move. They erupted from the ground around the chapel, thick and powerful as pythons. They were not attacking the family, they were attacking the Fae. One massive, gnarled root slammed into a hunger grin, crushing its skeletal body against the crumbling wall. Others shot up, wrapping around the limbs of the chanting goblins and mermaidens, dragging them screaming down into the soil. The land, awakened and enraged, was purging the infection that had festered upon it for so long. The Lord of Tatters let out a furious, stony roar. He was the master of the castle, but he was not the master of the knoll. He had been a tenant, a parasite, and the host was now rejecting him. He turned his burning eyes on Rowena. It was her fault. He lunged for her, his twig-like claws extended. But Isla's song, now filled with a fierce, defiant power, seemed to create a shield of sound around them. The Fey Lord slammed into an invisible barrier, thrown back. The castle itself began to scream. A high, tearing sound of stone grinding against stone echoed from the fog. The impossible glamour that held it together was unraveling, its power being reclaimed by the angry earth. They saw flashes through the fog, a pristine tower crumbling into a ruin, a glowing window going dark, the illusion dissolving like sugar in water. A massive root, thicker than a man's waist, erupted from the ground at the Fey Lord's feet. It wrapped around his body of bark and rags, pulling him down. He clawed at it, his form flickering, showing the handsome Laird for a moment, his face a mask of terror, then the tattered monster, then the man again. "The story," he shrieked, his voice a blend of smooth baritone and grinding rock. "It cannot end. It is my story." The root gave a final, violent tug, pulling him under the earth. His last scream was cut off as the ground sealed over him, leaving only silence. The rest of the Fae fled. The spindly man, the Kelpie, all the remaining horrors abandoned the dying castle and scattered into the woods, their connection to their anchor severed. The ground fell still, the groaning ceased. Isla's song faltered and died, leaving an ringing silence. The fog, no longer held by the castle's power, began to thin, revealing a bruised, pre-dawn sky. In the distance, the silhouette of the castle was no longer a perfect Gothic fantasy. It was a dark, jagged ruin, its towers broken, its walls crumbling. The illusion was gone. All that remained was the rot. They huddled together in the ruins of the chapel, shivering, bleeding, but alive. As the first true rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, they saw a figure approaching. It was Morag. She walked with a steady, unhurried pace, her face grim, but the hard lines around her eyes seemed to have softened. "The land accepted your offering," she said, her voice quiet. She looked at the ruined castle. "It hasn't been quiet like this in my lifetime, or my mother, or hers." She looked at the family, at their wounds, their terror, their resilience. "The story of Blackwood Keep is over. You finished it." She helped them bind their wounds properly and led them, limping and leaning on one another, away from the ruin, away from the woods, onto a path that led back towards the village, towards the world of the living. They never knew what happened to the scattered Fae. They never returned to the knoll. The shell of Blackwood Keep was left to crumble, a forgotten ruin on a hill no one dared to climb, its long and terrible history finally concluded. The Mathesons bore the scars of their ordeal, both physical and mental, for the rest of their lives. They had walked into a fairy tale and found that the old stories, the darkest ones, were true. They had survived not by fighting the monster, but by forcing it to face the truth of its own story, a truth so corrupt that the very land it stood on could no longer bear its weight. They left the knoll behind, but the silence that now reigned there was their own, hard-won epitaph, a testament to a family that had been chosen as the next verse in a song of horror, and had instead, against all hope, sung it to an end. The end.